Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Fractured Vows. Episode 4. Chapter 31. Eli. We arrived at Keith's pack house just before it was pitch black. We pulled up to the pack house and was greeted by Alpha Gareth. Alpha Eli, Alpha Dean, he called, walking down the steps toward us. You're early. I thought your father told my son you would be coming tomorrow evening. Well, my father thought it would be best if we came tonight, I said and quickly glanced at Alpha Dean. We wanted to ensure we had the best rooms and seats for this fight you are hosting. Alpha Gareth smiled and nodded. I want to introduce to you my beta Logan, I said, glancing at Logan. Alpha Gareth nodded. It is nice to meet you finally, he said. But I have to say, you look nothing like Lena. Blaze perks up at the mention of Lena. Logan glanced at me but smiled back at Alpha Gareth. I know, he said. You must be so proud to know that she is competing in the fight. Your uncle informed me a few hours ago, he said. Logan nodded. I am. I can't wait to see her fight, he said. We can't wait. That was an understatement. I looked around, but there weren't many people around. I wondered where Keith's house was, I thought. Logan and Alpha Dean give me a knowing smirk, probably knowing what I was thinking. Well, I will show you all to your rooms, Alpha Gareth said. You will share a room as we have to combine it for a few other people if that's okay. We nodded. We follow Alpha Gareth through the pack house and up 2 flights of stairs. Once we came to the room we were staying in, we noticed it was like a little apartment. I glanced at Alpha Gareth, who smiled back. This pack house has a few little apartments and single rooms. As I believe 2 of you have mates, and Alpha Eli you are looking for yours, I thought I would give you the apartment. But if you do hook up with anyone, there is a room down the hall you could use. I glared at the man. How dare he insinuate that I would hook up with anyone? Blaze grins. We could bring mate there, he said. I didn't say anything. I glanced back at Logan and Alpha Dean, smirking even more. Just frigging great. Alpha Gareth said his goodbyes and walked away. We all headed into the apartment. I have to admit, it looks nice and spacious. Well, isn't this cozy, said Alpha Dean, standing in the middle of the room. I looked around and walked over to the couch to sit. Logan was standing like a lemon, but I noticed he had a blank expression on his face. When he comes back to me, his face turns. What's wrong with you? I asked him. Logan looked at me. My uncle and father are on their way here now, he said. I stared at him, but he shook his head. Don't get any ideas, he said. My father sounded pissed, and by the sound of my uncle, we might be in for one hell of a shouting match. I stared back at him and stayed silent. I knew both men found out what happened to Lena, but something tells me that Logan and I are going to get it in the neck for not noticing what happened to her. Alpha Dean stares between us, but before he can say anything, there is a knock at the door. Logan looks over at me and nods. He walks to the door and opens it. There stood in the doorway were 2 very pissed men, and they were both glaring at me. I couldn't help but gulp. Alpha Dean sits on the chair by the window, waiting for the showdown. Once Tim and Keith entered the room, Logan closed the door behind them. Logan moves into the room, but his father grabs him by the ear and growls. You jackass, he snarled. You should have known what was happening to Lena, she's your sister. Tim lets go of Logan's ear. Logan grunted, and his hand went to his ear. He rubbed his ear but didn't say anything. Tim turned his attention to me and growled louder. You are one stupid jerk, he yelled. You hurt my baby, and you made me feel sorry for you because you had to wait to claim her, but you still proceeded in being a man-whore. Ouch, but I knew I had it coming. Keith glared at me. I don't know what I'm more pissed at, he said. Your stupid ways or the fact you never once thought about Lena. I kept my mouth shut. I felt like a naughty school who was sent to the headmaster's office. Tim paces back and forth, but Keith stares at me. Father and uncle want to kill you, said Blaze. I might join in with them too. Great, now my frigging wolf wants to kick my ass. I looked at both men. Look, I know I f***ed up, I said. Both of us were self-obsessed man-whores who only thought more about their CKS. I never thought Lena was my mate at the time, and she never showed anything to us. She never mentioned anything. If she did, we both would have done something about it. Tim stopped and looked at me. How didn't we not notice what was going on, he said. I stare at him, but someone clears their throat, making us all look toward Alpha Dean. I think she hid it too well, he said. It seems she knew no one would notice, judging from what I have heard about this whole situation and mess. Your daughter probably would have if she felt like she could have gone to someone. We stared at him, but Alpha Dean carried on. I don't know the girl, obviously, she seems like a nice girl. I would never doubt it, but when you live in a house full of men, and one where your brother and his friend brought girls back, she probably felt like she couldn't speak up. He looked at me and sighed. You know what my mate went through, he said. My stomach drops. How could I have forgotten? Alpha Dean looked at the others and started to tell them. My mate, Luna Stephanie, was bullied because she never fitted in, and the bullying got worse. They left a few physical scars on her, which were hideous. When I met her, she was too ashamed to be seen with me, and she thought she could never be the Luna I needed her to be, he said. A few she-wolves made her life so difficult that I had to send them to other packs or banish them. It was hard, but it had to be done. Tim looked at Alpha Dean and sighed. I'm sorry about your Luna, he said. Alpha Dean nodded. He looked over at me. That she-wolf needs to be gone, he said. I nodded. I know Naomi needed to go, but something was niggling at me. She will, but not just yet, I said to them, which didn't go down too well with Tim and Keith, who growled at me. I frowned. It's not what you think, I said to them. I told them about the two men and Naomi being with them. Tim looked toward Keith. Why would they be looking for Lena or going to my house? He asked. I think the more important question is, why was Naomi with them in the first place, said Keith. I stared at them, but Keith turned to face me. I know you are here to talk to Alpha Trevor, but Lena is off limits, he said. I stared at him. Blaze didn't like that one bit. Don't pull that face with me, Keith said. Lena has to train for this fight, and she needs to be mentally in the zone. You being here could mean two things: she will make sure she kicks your ass, or she might make sure that the rejection sticks. But I know her, she might even skip the fight altogether. I stared at him, not saying a word. Tim looked at me. You f***ed up big time, Eli, he said. She might not want to have you back, and you might go home without her. I can't let that happen, I said. How am I going to make it up to her? I need to tell her that it never meant anything, I never meant to hurt her. Neither of them spoke. I leaned further back into the couch. I don't know what to say, said Keith. I'm going to train her by the house, and you need to stay here and come nowhere near there. I mean it, Eli, she can't know you are here. I need her to be focused. I stared at him for a moment and nodded. Both men leave after saying goodbye. Once they left, Logan sat next to me. Alpha Dean was on his phone, but I could tell he was staring now and then. "You need to listen to Keith," said Logan. "You can talk to Lena after the fight." I leaned back and looked at Blaze. He was staring at me. "We need to let Mate train," he said. "We must, or we will lose her if she finds out." I nodded, but I knew this was going to be hard. I wanted to see her. Chapter 32. Eli. The following 2 days were hard, knowing that Lena was somewhere around the pack killed me. But I needed to keep my distance, and I wanted to prove that I could give her space. I have mainly been stuck near the pack house while Logan and Alpha Dean checked out the pack lands. Logan went to see Lena yesterday, but he hasn't come back. I know I have to stay away, but I need to see her, even if it's from a distance. Alpha Dean came back, and we have been searching for Alpha Trevor, but he hasn't shown up. We told Alpha Gareth not to mention anything about us being here, as we wanted to check out the situation with him. I mean, we needed to work out where he is in all these rogue attacks. Blaze has been pacing back and forth in my head. He wants to see Lena, even though he's all about her having space to concentrate on the fight that's coming up. I still feel his need for her and the anxiety rolling off him. "What's wrong with you?" I asked as I watched him come to a complete stop and look at me. Blaze huffed out. "I want to see Mate, know she is okay," he said. "Also, can you feed us? I want steak." At the mere mention of steak, my stomach growled loudly. I hadn't eaten tidy since we arrived, but I think it was because I missed Lena and the not knowing part. I looked around the apartment and realized that Alpha Dean was in his room with his phone attached to his ear. He has been on his phone talking to Luna Stefine most of the time. I shrugged. I might as well go down on my own for food. I walked out and headed to the hall, where the food was served. I walked in and noticed a few people around. I ignored all the she-wolves' glances as I wasn't in the mood to deal with them. A few times, we all came down here for the food. Most hounded me like I was fresh meat. I didn't want anything to do with them. Some got the hint, but for others, I had to use my alpha aura to command them to stay away. They weren't Lena. I grabbed some food and headed to a nearby table to eat. I sat down and placed my plate in front of me. I was enjoying the food when there was a shadow hovering above me. I looked up and noticed 2 women. I couldn't help but frown. A low growl comes from my chest as I place food back onto the plate. "I thought I told you all to leave me alone," I muttered as I looked up at the 2 women. Both women laughed. "You're funny," one said as she pulled a chair out and sat down. The other woman took the seat next to her. I stared at them. Who do they think they are talking to? The woman looked at me and frowned. "Alpha, sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disrespect you, we not like the other she-wolves around here." The other one nodded. "We're mates," she said. "To one another, so you are not really our type," with a slight smirk. I could hear Blaze laugh in my head, but I ignored him. "Sorry," I said. "Everyone wants to jump in my pants or get with an alpha ever since I've been here." The women nodded. "We noticed, that's why we thought we would come over to help you out. I'm Anna, and this is my mate, Blair." I smiled. "Nice to meet you both," I said. "Which pack are you from?" asked Blair. "I'm the alpha of the Blue Moon Shadow Pack," I said. "I have come here to watch the fight." Blair smiled. "It's my first time watching one of these fights," she said. "We only came back here a week ago." I nodded. But my eyes went to Anna, who hadn't even stopped looking at me. Something was written on her face, but I couldn't work out what. Anna shook her head when she realized I was staring at her and cleared her throat. "Babe, can you get me a coffee, please?" she asked Blair, turning to her. Blair nodded and even asked if I wanted another one. I nodded, and Blair walked off. I kept my eyes on Anna. As Blair was out of earshot, Anna turned and looked at me, and her face hardened. "So, you know Lena then?" she asked. I nodded, but I kept my mouth shut. The mere mention of Lena gave me a total punch in my stomach. "She never talked much about the pack," she said, eyes burning daggers into me. "What was her problem?" "You know Lena?" I asked. Anna nodded but glanced over her shoulder to keep an eye on Blair, who was waiting for the kettle to boil. Anna turned back and looked back at me. "Yeah, I know her," she said. "I know her really well." I could feel Blaze come closer and even look through my eyes at her. "Okay, so you were her friend," I said as I moved my head to one side. "You could say that," she said. "I mean, she was my first, and I know I was hers." I stared at her, trying to figure out what she was going on about. "I know Lena had a hard time making friends within our pack due to Naomi, but here. She only made one, but that doesn't seem right. I spoke to a few people around here, and they all had nice things to say about her when they discovered she was from my pack. Some even wondered why she left the pack in the first place. I never said anything, as I never wanted to discuss that part with anyone again. And I know Lena wants her privacy." I looked back at Anna and frowned. "Are you trying to insinuate something?" I asked as I stared at her. Something was on her face. She was about to open her mouth, but Blair returned. She handed me my mug and placed Anna and her mug down. "I have to say, I bet you're excited to see your pack member in this fight," said Blair, which made me look over at her. I smiled. "I am," I said, feeling the tightness in my throat. I could feel Anna stare at me. I was about to talk more when Logan opened a mind link to me. "Hey, man," he said. "I will be back at the pack with Uncle Keith. He needs to find something out about the fight. Also, he wants to speak to you." "Okay, I'm in the hall," I said. "I'm sitting with two women, Anna and Blair." Logan growled. "You," he said, but a low growl erupted out of my chest. "Not like that, they're mates." "And I won't do that to Lena," I said. "Not again." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Sorry, man," he said. "I know you're trying to make it work and be good." I frowned. "I will meet you here soon," I said and closed the mind link. Blaze was staring at me, but his eyes were focused on Anna. Something about her made him head and stare at her. "What's wrong with you?" I asked him. His eyes look at me, but a slow smirk spreads across his face, but he doesn't say anything. I looked away from him and returned to Blair and Anna looking at me. "Sorry," I said. My beta mind linked me, telling me he and Keith were coming here. Blair nodded, but I couldn't help but look at Anna. Her face went a shade paler when I mentioned Keith when I glanced at her. Anna cleared her throat and put on a fake smile. "I think we should leave. I need to get to my patrol post," she said. I didn't say anything but nodded as Anna and Blair moved away from the table, but only Blair waved back. Anna couldn't get away from me quick enough. I looked at Blaze, who was smirking. "What is wrong?" I asked. Blaze burst out laughing. I frowned. "Blaze," I said with a warning. I was getting pissed off with all this fakeness, especially with Anna. Blaze quickly stopped laughing but sighed. I had a lovely chat with Anna's wolf, he said. She was lovely and happily in love with her mate. Anna too, but she wanted to tell me why Anna was acting strangely. I nodded. Blaze tried to keep a straight face. It seems mate and Anna had a fling, he said, a smirk appearing on the corners of his mouth. Mate and Anna shared a special kiss one night, and Anna was in love with her, and her wolf was in love with Bex. My eyebrows shot up. Lena and Anna shared a kiss. Linus wasn't into girls, was she? I didn't know whether to be concerned or turned on. I shook the thought out of my head. I was about to talk to Blaze when someone cleared their throat. I looked back to see who it was and was stunned. The person who I had been trying to talk to for months was now standing in front of me. Alpha Trevor. Chapter 33. Eli. I stared at him, not knowing what to make of all this. Alpha Trevor smiled. Alpha Eli, he said. It's a surprise to see you here, I didn't think you ever come to this pack. I didn't know whether to growl or punch that smug look off his face. Why would I not be here? I asked. Blaze was up on all paws and on high alert for some strange reason. Alpha Trevor smiled. Oh, no reason, he said. He moved his arm, pulled back his shirt sleeve to reveal a watch, and looked at it. I had best make a move. I have a walk around with Alpha Gareth, he said. I want to check out this pack as I've never been here before. I stared at him, not saying anything. Alpha Trevor turned on his heel and headed out the hall. As he walked past, Alpha Dean stopped, but Alpha Trevor walked past him, completely ignoring him. Alpha Dean stared at where Alpha Trevor was, but I could see the look of confusion when he turned to face me. Alpha Dean walked toward me and pulled out a chair to sit on. What was his problem? He asked with a slight growl escaping his lips. I shrugged. He wanted to know why I showed my face here, I told him. Alpha Dean stared at me, confused. Strange, he said. He seemed to be on a mission. I glanced at the doorway. Something was up with Alpha Trevor, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Alpha Dean had a blank expression on his face. I looked back toward Blaze, who had a scowl on his face. What's up with you? I asked. Blaze looked at me and sighed. I don't know, but that Alpha is up to something, he said as he slid down till his whole body was lying down. When he saw us, he had a strange look like he wasn't expecting you. I frowned. He wasn't, I said. My father found out he would be here and sent us here to confront him. Blaze nodded. I know that, he said. I mean, the look on his face said otherwise, that you weren't meant to be here at all. I stared at him. Someone cleared their throat, and I saw Keith and Logan sitting around the table with Alpha Dean. Keith looked at me but didn't say anything. How is she? I asked, which made him frown. I kept my end of the bargain, and I haven't seen her. I just want to know how she is. Keith looked at me, but after a few seconds, he sighed. She's okay, he said. She has been focused on her training and seems to be putting all her frustration into everything she does. I can feel it through the kicks and punches she did. I didn't say anything, but everyone had knowing smirks on their faces. I didn't need to ask who she was thinking about when she was doing them. So what time is the fight? I asked, trying to change the subject. In a few hours, said Keith, but looked at Logan, then back to me. You will have to stay out of sight, he said. Lena is coming over here with her father. She wants to be in the changing rooms away from all the people, to get in the zone. I nodded, but my heart was beating hard in my chest. Knowing she would be here soon was like waiting for a present to come, but I knew I had to stay away until after the fight. I will stay here, I said. I don't want her to lose focus or anything. Keith nodded, but a slow smirk slid across his face. So, you met Anna, he said. I nodded. How is she? He asked. Okay, I guess, I said as I stared at him. What was her relationship with Lena? I mean, she told me friends, but Blaze got something different from her wolf. I could hear Blaze snigger in my head, I just wanted confirmation that what he heard was right. Keith laughed. Oh, they were friends at the beginning, he said, looking between us. Anna's gay, but she had a thing for Lena, and everyone knew about it. I know they shared a kiss, but it wasn't Lena's doing. She was caught off guard, even though I think she liked it. I frowned, which earned a few laughs from the others. Eli, Keith said. Anna has a thing for Lena, but Lena never would. She knew she wasn't her mate, but Anna was always around after that kiss, making things difficult for Lena. In the end, Alpha Gareth had to send her to other packs to find her mate. Well, she found Blair, I said. But I don't think Blair knows about Lena. I mean, Anna asked me a few questions, but something about how she was. She even asked Blair to go to fetch a coffee for her and me so she could talk to me. Keith's face went hard. You didn't tell her about Lena and you, did you? He asked. I shook my head. No, I didn't, I said. I would rather tell all of our pack that first. Keith didn't say anything, but something was written on his face. But he shook his head and looked back at me. I think I should show you where you can go. I mean, I know you will want to watch her fight, but I mean this, Eli, do not show yourself until the end of the fight. Bex and Lena need to be focused on winning, he said. I nodded, but my heart sank at the thought of not seeing her. We all moved from the table and headed to where the fight would be held. We headed out of the pack house and walked to a big building next to it. It looked like a hall. As we walked inside, many pack members were putting up chairs, and the area where it was being held looked like it would hold loads of people. We walked in, but the scent hit me hard. Lena was here. I looked toward Keith, who shook his head and pointed to the side where a door was. I walked over with everyone following behind me. Fearing that she would see me, I noticed it was a viewing room. I walked over to the window and stared through the window, only to let a low growl slip through. I could feel Keith next to me tense. Alpha Dean stood and watched as well. Lena was indeed in the room, she was with Alpha Gareth. But I wasn't growling at him, it was the other person who was there. Alpha Trevor. He was holding onto Lena's hand, which she tried to pull out of his grip, but the slimy toad wouldn't let go of her hand. They spoke, but something about her face made me want to go in there to rescue her. Lena looked uncomfortable. After a few moments, Alpha Gareth and Alpha Trevor moved and walked toward the door to walk out. I walked over to the door and opened it slightly. I made sure no one could see me. The door opened, and they walked through, stopping not far from the door I was behind. So, said Alpha Gareth. She's amazing, as you thought. I could feel Blaze come closer but growled loudly in my head. I had to calm him down. Yeah, she is, Alpha Trevor said. I couldn't see his face. She is definitely my mate. What? The lying bastard. You sure? Said Alpha Gareth, sounding confused. I mean, Lena never mentioned anything when you held her hand. Oh, she was probably shy, said Alpha Trevor. I think she was focused on the fight and not to show anything, she needed to be focused on defeating her opponent. I could feel anger fill my veins. The lying piece of A*S is trying to convince someone she's his mate. She's not, she's mine. After a few brief words, I didn't hear, both alphas walked through the door that leads to the outside. I closed the door and looked at everyone, confused and angry. "What the actual hell?" shouted Logan. "He's not Lena's mate, Eli is." I looked at him, but I was very pissed off. Keith came beside me. He had a hard line on his face. "I don't know what I believe," he said. "Lena rejected Eli, so he could." I didn't let him finish as Blaze pushed through, anger filling us. "Mate is ours, we didn't accept rejection," he roared. I could feel Blaze trying to push through, trying to get out. I needed to get out of there, clear my head, or be in contempt of killing another alpha. I turned around and walked out, ignoring everyone who was calling me. I headed through the door. I could hear Logan and Alpha Dean call me, but I slipped through the door. I glanced around the ground and spotted Alpha Trevor leaving Alpha Gareth to take a call. I growled. I wanted his head. "He can't have what's mine." I walked toward where they were but stopped. "We need to kill him," roared Blaze in my head. "No," I said. "As much as I want to, we must think through this. We can't do something so stupid, we need to be careful. I mean, we need to show and prove to Bex and Lena that we are theirs." Blaze stares at me but doesn't say anything. I sighed. "I know, I f'd up," I said. "I want to talk to her, I mean to settle everything. I want to show her I can change." I looked at Alpha Trevor, who was looking around, but his eyes landed on me. He smirked. "I need to show Lena I'm not the man she thinks I am," I said. Blaze nodded but still didn't say anything. "We will go for a run," I said. "We need to clear our heads." "Well, I mean, I do." Blaze doesn't say anything as I walked toward the forest, but I still could feel Alpha Trevor's eyes on me. I didn't care about the clothes I had on as I let Blaze take over and shredded them. Once Blaze stood and shook his fur, he blotted into the forest. We needed to run, and I needed to clear my head. I needed to do this right, I mean, I needed to win Lena over, but I had to make sure Alpha Trevor was not her mate. If he is, I will let her decide who she wants. Blaze growls at my thought, but he knows I'm right. I f'd up with her. I hurt her in the worst possible way. I had to let her decide who she wanted to be with. If it wasn't me, I would let her walk away. Blaze whimpers at the thought. I just hope I can survive whatever the outcome is. Chapter 34. Lena. It has been a grueling day of non-stop training. Uncle Keith has been kicking my ass. The amount of times he has put me on my A*S has been unreal. I mean, I know he knows his stuff, but he likes to kick a girl when she's down. I remember Uncle Keith telling me to put all my frustration and anger into my punches and kicks. I think he changed his mind, especially when Bex kept placing an image of Eli in my head and Naomi's. The thought of Naomi made my blood boil. I wanted her to suffer as much as I have, but I also wished to show her what I am made of and would love to wrap my hand around her neck. I was punching the punch bag when I heard someone call out, "You know, you can throw a mean punch, Lena." I stopped and stared at the person before me. I was stunned. He was meant to be home with Sophia. Logan stopped in his tracks as his eyes landed on me. He moved his head to the side. "You okay?" he asked. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Logan was about to open his mouth, but my father beat him to it. I asked Alpha Frank to let Logan come as we had a few things to discuss, my father said as he approached me. I stared at both of them. Somehow, I don't believe that. I could feel Beck's snigger in my head. Lena, said my father as he came closer, but stopped when he noticed the look I gave him. I know you want to talk, I said as I punched the punch bag hard. But I need to train for this fight. I wanted to ignore them, or better yet, for everyone to leave me alone. I could feel their eyes on me. I sighed. I knew we had to talk as a family about what happened, but I was struggling to keep my emotions in check. Fine, I said. I peeled the strap of the boxing gloves and removed both gloves. I turned to look at them and stared for a moment. I will talk, I said. But I don't want to talk, Eli. My father nodded. I turned to face Logan, who stared for a moment. I frowned. Logan threw up his hands in surrender. I won't ask, he said. I won't anyway. I know you too well, Lena, you will tell us when you're ready. I didn't say anything. I knew my father and brother wouldn't bring it up, but I guess if they were women, it would be a different story. We all turned around and headed inside. Keith was with Alpha Gareth, he had a mind link to go and see him. But since Logan is here, I guess they came up with this family meeting. We all walked into the kitchen and sat around the table. I sat on the opposite side and watched them for a few moments. My father cleared his throat. Lena, I know you explained to me what happened, I think you should tell Logan. I turned to Logan, but I knew he had read the diaries I kept with one glance. I knew I told Sophia to show Eli, I guess Logan was in the room when she handed the box to him. You know, I said. Logan nodded, anger written all over his face. I have to say, Lena, you kept those diaries well informed, he said. He stared at me for a moment. I know I was a prick back then, he said with a slight sigh. But I would have fought in your corner and told everyone to back off. I stared at him, trying to figure out whether I should trust his words. I could feel Bex in my head, knowing she was close by. She was listening in, I guess she was trying to figure out the same thing as I was. You don't believe me, don't you? Said Logan, looking slightly hurt by his own statement. I sighed. JAS, I said. You have to realize, and Dad, too, I leaned back into the kitchen chair and carried on talking. You both were doing your own thing. Dad, you are still grieving for Mum and JAS, I said as I looked at him. As much as I want to believe you, we both know that you were thinking about that DK of yours when it came to girls. Logan was hurt by what I said. But it's the truth, he was all about getting laid. Logan and Eli were. I was the little sister of a man-whore brother. I heard stories from girls about what they were both like. Some people never thought I would listen to them, but I did, even if I didn't overhear it from others around me. Naomi would tell me everything every time she beat me or tormented me. I shuddered at the thought, and Bex growled. Look, there is nothing to say, I said. What has happened, has happened. We don't need to be reminiscing about it. We are not, said my father, who was full of regret. I knew he was, he had been staring at me today while I was training. I want to know how we can make it up to you. I admit I was slightly caught off guard by what he said. What do you mean? I asked, looking at him, confused. Logan looked at me, then at my father. I think what Dad is trying to say is, how can we make sure that it will never happen again, he said. I'm not 13 anymore, I said with slight frustration. I'm a grown-ass woman and can fight. I don't need either of you trying to protect me now. I can manage on my own. I stared at them for a moment but looked toward Bex in my head. What do you think? I asked her. Bex looks at me and moves her head to the side. Her eyes roam over my face, but she sighs. Lena, they are trying to make it better. They want to know how to change things between you all, which will get you to open up more to them. I stared at her, but she carried on. I think, she said as a smile etched her face. You all need to be more open with one another, tell them how you feel, and make sure they understand. That won't be easy, I said. We never opened up about anything. Bex smiled. Well, there is a first, she said. Why not try now? I sighed, but I have to admit she did have a point. We never spoke about anything, not even Mum. I looked back at them both, they both were looking blankly at me. I cleared my throat, which brought them both back to me. I stared at them for a moment, but an idea formed in my head. I think we should start talking more about things, I said. I looked at both of them and sighed. I think we need to start being more honest with each other. I looked at Logan, who was nodding, but Dad was silent. I knew this was hard for him as he never spoke to us about anything, but he needed to. We are his children, and we are now old enough to know what he is thinking, the good and the right ugly too. Dad, I said, and moved in my chair. I placed my hand over his. We need to be more open, I said. I never came to either of you, as I never thought I could. I mean, we never talk about anything unless it's pack related. I studied him as I carried on talking to him. We never bring up Mum, I said, making my throat tighten slightly at the mere mention of her. Do you know what it is like not to talk to you about her? The woman was a goddess in the kitchen and also someone who knew how to keep us all in check and even open up. I could feel the tears building up in the back of my eyes, but I knew I had to tell him. I hated not talking about Mum. I stared at the man before me, he was silent. But you could see the hurt and pain reflecting in his eyes at the mere mention of her. It must be so hard for him too. Dad, Lena is right, said Logan, who turned in his chair. We need to be more open. Logan sighed. Dad, I used girls to FK because I never wanted to feel the pain of losing someone as you did. Since meeting Sophia, my heart has been in my mouth when I'm not with her. Being here, he said, motioning his finger around the room. It is making me on edge, especially with all our rogue attacks. My eyes stayed on my father. I could feel my father's hand entwined with mine, and he gently squeezed it. The room was silent and full of high emotions. I know you both are right, he sighed. I noticed the single tear that slid down his face. I know I never talk about her, and I want to. Dad looked between us and smiled. Do you remember the breakfast she would make? He said. I mean, there was no excuse in her eyes for breakfast to be the biggest meal of the day. My father smiled, but I knew it was a weak one. I miss her so much, he said with a slight sob escaping his lips. I noticed Logan place his hand on his shoulder. Dad, I said. We all miss her. She was our rock when a storm came. I smiled. I can always remember Mum telling Logan off every time he left his shoes outside or left the toilet seat up, I said. Hey, yelled Logan, who had a smirk itching the corners of his face. She would always tell me that there were women around, and when my mate comes, I should show her that I knew how to do those things. I couldn't help but smirk. And how is that going? I asked. Sophia threw my shoe at me, he said. I still got a lump on my head. My father burst out laughing. I smiled. I missed his laugh so much. Once he had calmed down, we carried on talking about Mum. After a few tales, I did leave for a brief moment and handed my father the diary I kept. He skimmed over, but his eyes were more in awe that I had done something like that, something to remember her by. You should read it, I said. My father nodded. I will, he said. I bet there are some cracking stories about what we all did. I smiled. You bet, I said. I looked at Logan, and his eyes were on me. I know you don't want to know, he said. Eli is cut up about everything. He wished he knew about everything and would have done something about it. I frowned. Yeah, right, I said, but Logan shook his head. No, Lena, Eli would have. You might not believe it, I bet things would have been different if you told him. I stared at him. I didn't want to live in the past anymore, I had been there too often. I think I need to be more present, more now than ever. I shook my head and looked back at them. I don't know what to believe, I said. But I think if we keep talking about Mum, I will make you both a promise. I sighed. I will promise to be more open with you, especially when it comes to the past or present things, I said and looked toward them both. Now, I think we should have some food. I'm starving. My father grinned. I will make your mother's favorite meal, he said. Chicken fried steak, Logan and I said together. We looked at each other and burst out laughing. My father smiled. You both used to drive your mother crazy when you used to do that, he said. I smiled. I know we have all the ingredients here, he said. I asked Keith to pick up some things from the market. Dad moved out of the chair and headed into the kitchen. Dad knows how to cook, but he hasn't done much since Mum has been gone. I could hear my dad pottering around the kitchen. I think this is a new start to a good day, blurted Logan. I glanced toward him and smiled. I think you're right, I said. We stood by the table, and our conversation went back to Mum. We all miss her, but talking about her helps. Chapter 35. Lena. The rest of the evening went well, and my father's meal was out of this world. My mum would have approved. We talked about some of the things we used to get up to, and my dad even mentioned a few stories about the first time they met. Uncle Keith came home a few hours later and enjoyed a few tales of Mum. He even had a few himself, some that she made him never tell us because they were so embarrassing. Uncle Keith had a good relationship with Mum, treating her like a sister. We laughed for hours. After the sun was setting, Uncle Keith had me back out of the house and train. Logan even got involved in my training. I think Bex had the same idea. She used all her strength and knocked him on his A*S a few times. She had a laughing fit every time he landed on his ass. Paybacks ABH, she would say to me as I tried to hold in a laugh. Logan wanted me not to hold back. After the first punch, I think he regretted it. But I must admit it was nice training with them, even Dad got involved too. That night we all went to sleep happy and had everything ready for the next day. I got up and had a light breakfast with everyone. I was going to go up with Dad as I had a few things to take with me, and he offered to help me. I was going to train in the morning with everyone before we all headed to the hall for the fight. After a light lunch, Uncle Keith had a mind link to go up to the pack house, taking Logan with him. As Logan and Uncle Keith left, Dad came into my room and smiled. You ready? He asked, leaning on the door frame. I looked over my shoulder, placed my towel into the bag, and smiled at him. Just packed what I needed, I said as I turned around. Dad pushed off the doorframe and walked over to me. Lena, I'm so proud of you, he said, stopping in front of me. Your mum would be too. I couldn't help the heartache wash over me. I think that's the first time my father said something like that to me since my mum died. I smiled back at him. "Shall we go?" he asked. I nodded. I grabbed my bag and flung it over my shoulder. Dad grabbed a few other bits I needed as we headed out the door. We walked to the pack house slowly. I pointed out a few things to Dad. We talked about everything but the fight. I have to admit I'm glad he didn't say anything. I stopped outside the pack house and looked around. Everyone was preparing for the charity event. People were carrying things into the hall, including chairs and speakers. I spotted Nathan talking to some people who I had never met. I glanced around and realized that there were people that I didn't know who many were. They might be here for the charity fight. Many were alphas and betas, but members of the pack were walking around, chatting and laughing. I sighed. I said goodbye to my father as he was going to find Uncle Keith and Logan. We hugged, and we both headed in different directions. I headed to the hall and walked up. My stomach flipped when I spotted the ring. It was how I remembered it. Bex came close to check it out. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded but didn't say anything. In the last fight, I won and even had a few bruises to show. Uncle Keith was proud and also was Alpha Gareth. I shook my head and was about to walk toward the entrance where the changing rooms were being held. I wanted to chill behind, so I wasn't so nervous. I hated talking to people before a fight, it put me on edge. I could hear someone clearing their throat, and I spun around. My eyes landed on Alpha Gareth and some other Alpha. "Ah, Lena," said Alpha Gareth. "I am so happy we caught you. Alpha Trevor here is such a big fan of yours." My eyes landed on Alpha Trevor, who had the cheek to check me out. His eyes roamed all over my body. It was not creeping at all, as a shiver ran down my back, and not in a good way. Something about this guy wasn't right. Alpha Trevor's eyes landed on mine, and he smiled. He placed his hand out. I looked at it and took it for a few seconds, but as soon as our hands touched, the same shiver returned. Bex was up in my head, a low growl escaping her mouth. "He better take his slimy hand out of your hand," she growled. I didn't say anything, I was trying to calm her down. "I have to say," said Alpha Trevor, whose hand tightened on my hand slightly as if he wasn't going to let go anytime soon. "You are one magnificent beauty, and you fight so well for someone so small." I wanted to punch the smugness from that stupid-looking face. I placed a fake smile on my face, more like gritted teeth. "Thank you," I said. I tried to move my hand from his, but he wasn't letting it go. I glanced at Alpha Gareth, who was smiling like a Cheshire cat. "We can't wait to see you fight," Alpha Trevor said, making me look back at him. Alpha Trevor smiled. "I never got to see your fight last time, but my sister showed me the fight, and I have to say I was taken by you." Bex growled. I didn't say anything, I was struggling to keep Bex under control. There was an awkward silence between us till Alpha Gareth cleared his throat. "We shall be leaving you, I bet you have a few things to do before the fight," he said. I nodded, but I couldn't help but clench my teeth. Alpha Trevor lets go of my hand, and I'm quick to move it back. I watched as they both left. Alpha Trevor looks over his shoulder at me and winks. I shuddered. "That Alpha needs to back off," says Bex with a growl. I couldn't agree more with her. I turned to walk away and headed towards the back entrance. I found my changing room, which wasn't far from the ring's entrance. Once inside, I threw my bag down and sat on the bench. I couldn't help my head fall and close my eyes. Bex stares back and nods. She knows I'm trying to get in the zone. After a few moments, Uncle Keith burst into my room. My eyes flew open to see the look on his face, and I scrunched my eyebrows. "What's wrong?" I asked him. Uncle Keith stared at me but sighed. "I have just seen who you are fighting," he said. I stared at him, judging by his face, it couldn't be good. "Well, who?" I asked. Uncle Keith stared at me. "Tammy Harsh," he said. I felt my stomach churn. That isn't good. Chapter 36. Eli Blake ran through the forest. I could feel his anger but also fear. I knew where my wolf's head was, and I couldn't help but feel the same. This is all my fault. I should have learned how to keep it in my pants. I knew I had a mate, and I still did it. Blaze didn't talk to me during the whole run. I moved further back in his head and rested. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see her, Lena. My heart was breaking, the thought of her being away from me now killed me. But I had to stay away, and she had a big fight coming up. No one mentioned after the fight what would happen, but I wanted to see her, whatever anyone says. I felt a jolt as Blaze came to a stop. I moved forward and looked through his eyes. We stopped by a lake of some kind. I glanced at the surroundings, and it was beyond gorgeous. The water sparkled as the sun shone on it. Blaze trotted over and bent down to drink. After a few gulps, Blaze sat on his hind legs and looked out at the beauty nature had to offer us. We stood silent for a few moments before Blaze opened his mouth. "Human, you need to listen to me and listen well," he said. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. "Mate is our mate, no one else's. I want mate more." Blaze takes his focus off the lake and looks back at me. "I have waited long enough for my mate, but you can't think with your CK. I know you already blame yourself, and I blame you too," he said. "I know you want to let mate calm down or even have some space," and sighed. "Geesh, hit a man when he is down," I thought. Blaze grunted. "This is not a pity party, human," he said with a low growl slipping through his lips. Blaze's eyes burned into me as he stared hard. He was pissed, and he had a right to be. "You held me back," he said. I couldn't help but raise my eyebrows slightly. "We are alpha, and we need to start acting like it, not like a stupid human teenage wolf. I know you want to give mate space, and we will wait after the fight. After the fight, we are fighting for what is ours, no family or alpha will stop me, us even." I could feel his motivation running through us. "I will never accept mate's rejection, and I will make sure she knows we are hers," he said. "Even if I take over your body and be you for a while." I couldn't help but frown at him. It's not known for a wolf to inhabit their human body for so long as they hate the way it feels or something. Well, that's what Blaze used to say when he would take over. But I guess if a wolf is determined or hasn't got a choice in the matter, they would do anything, especially if it means being with their mate. I looked at him. I knew he was right. I have been having a pity party for the last few days. Even when Lena was here, I was still trying to make her realize that we were mates. I sighed, but something hit me hard. Memories of the last week came flooding back, the way I had acted towards her and spoken to her. I was more or less thinking again, but there was one thing I didn't do, and that was listen to her. The way she spoke when she wanted to challenge me, to fight me. I can see that she wanted to prove something, even though she never had to prove anything to me, she probably wanted to prove herself. "I think you're right," I said, looking at Blaze. "I have been in a pity party, haven't I?" Blaze nodded. "I was listening to everyone else, Not my heart, I said. I want Lena, and I think I know how to make her see that we are meant to be. I looked at him but didn't say anything for a moment. I know I never put you first, but and I am truly sorry. I knew you were struggling with Lena being there, and when I sent her away, I knew I had hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing. I never thought how it would affect you or what it would do to you. Blaze moved his head to one side as a slow smile slid across his mouth. I thought more about RCK than anything, I said. Blaze nodded. I could feel his mood change slightly. I know you want to talk to mate, and I will let you, I said. I think she needs to hear your side before she talks to me. I sighed. I have been a stupid dumbass, I said, which made Blaze chuckle. I'm an alpha, for God's sake, I shouldn't be acting like a stupid ass. I looked back at him. I knew what I had to do. When we return, I am announcing Lena as our mate, I said. As for Naomi, I said, which earned me a growl. She will be sent away. She should be held accountable for her actions against Lena over the years. Looking back, when Lena left, Naomi was a completely different person. She was a lot nicer and even stayed away from me, especially when she found Bruce. She would be polite but still had that naughty side to her, but nothing too serious like when she was in school. When Lena came back, it was like a flip of a switch, and she was back to how she was. It could have been her wolf, said Blaze. I stared back at him, stunned. Her wolf might have taken over, he said. She would if she had no choice. I stared at him. Memories of what she was like before and after Lena flooded into me. Blaze was right, her wolf must have taken over her. She never once came near me, and the way she had a go at me when I told her about Lena. That was not Naomi. If it were, Naomi wouldn't have cared less about Lena's feelings. Blaze looked at me with a knowing look, like we thought the same thing. Her wolf must have had no other choice, especially if it came to her mate. It would be down to her mate, said Blaze, who started walking away from the lake and headed through the forest again. I looked through his eyes. We were heading in a different direction. Blaze stopped, and I couldn't help but stare at the house. Blaze lifted his nose in the air and sniffed. A whimper left his lips, but I knew what he smelt. Mate, he whispered. I looked at the house. It was a decent size and out of the way of all the other pack members. I glanced around the garden, and my eyes landed on a punching bag hanging from a tree. There was a whole load of different equipment out here, she must have used it for training. We should go, I said to Blaze. We don't want to be late for Lena's fight. Blaze nodded. He started to trot away from the house. As we got closer to the pack house and there standing on the outskirts were Tim and Logan. Blaze walked over to them, and they both turned. Logan handed some clothes to Blaze by placing them in his mouth. We walked over to a tree and shifted behind it. I dressed quickly, placing a pair of jeans and a shirt on. I walked from behind the tree, and Logan handed me my shoes. I slipped them on and glanced at them. I told my father what happened with Alpha Trevor, said Logan. I looked at Tim, and his face was pulled into a hard line. He didn't say anything. I want to talk to Lena after the fight, I said to them. It was a statement, not a request. Logan nodded, but Tim shook his head. I couldn't help but let a low growl sip through. I am waiting till after the fight, I said, which made him look at me. I am not accepting the rejection. I didn't want to go into great detail. I have stood by and had everyone dictate what I should do regarding Lena, and I am not letting them do it again. My father, Logan, Tim, and even Naomi. Let's go, I said. Blaze was sitting back on his hind legs when I looked back at him and nodded. We walked over to the hall doors, and I knew I would be watching her in the room behind the window. I kept my word to let her know I wasn't there, but all bets were off when the fight ended. Logan pulled open the doors, and they headed to the main entrance as I headed to the door in the viewing room. I walked in and noticed I wasn't alone. Keith. Keith stood up and looked over at me. I thought you could do with some company, he said. Blaze smirked. Mate kicked him out, he said. I looked at him and moved my head to the side. Why did she kick you out? I asked. Keith looked at me for a short moment and sighed. Blaze told you, he said. My wolf needs to keep his mouth shut. I couldn't help but chuckle slightly. Keith looked at me. She is fighting someone who has it in for her, he said. I stared at him. What do you mean by that? I asked, sounding slightly concerned. Keith looked at me and shook his head. Nothing to be concerned about, her opponent is a mean one, she likes to take shortcuts and even cheats on occasion, he said. I nodded. I walked over to the viewing window and noticed the room was filled with everyone. I spotted Alpha Dean sitting with Tim and Logan. Lena kicked me out of the room for being overbearing, he said as he stood next to me. I glanced around the room and spotted Alpha Trevor. He was sitting at the back, and I quickly glanced at Alpha Dean. I mind-linked Logan to tell Alpha Dean where to look. I watched as Logan leaned into Alpha Dean, and both men looked over their shoulders. Alpha Trevor never looked at them, but his eyes scanned the room. He must be trying to figure out where you are, said Keith. I looked over at him, and his eyes stared through the window. Alpha Trevor will never be Lena's mate, he said, and he moved his eyes from the window to look at me. She has always had feelings for you. She tried to fit in when she was here and even made friends. She has had a few relationships in the past, but I could always tell she wasn't into them. I stared at him. After the fight, you need to go backstage and talk to her, he said. I know you're not my alpha, but I know when someone is a true mate. I only saw it happen twice, and once was Tim and Lena's mum. Could Lena be my true mate? You f'd it up, he said, pulling me from my thoughts. But I know you can fix this. Before I could say anything, the announcer entered the ring, and the bell rang. All the people in the hall went quiet. I turned my attention to the person in the ring, but my eyes kept going to Alpha Trevor. Alpha Trevor had his phone out. I felt unease run through me. I knew he was up to something, but who was he on the phone to? Now, let's get these fights underway, shouted Alpha Gareth. I didn't hear what was said after, but I knew I must keep an eye on Alpha Trevor, but the curtain opened to the first contestants. Chapter 37. Lena. I sat in my changing room, feeling slightly sick to my stomach. Tammy Harsh was a mean rogue who loved to cheat in her matches and sometimes had help from her mate, Demon. Bex was on high alert and tried to settle me down, but nothing she said helped. I had to send Uncle Keith out of the changing room, he was driving me nuts. He kept on about Tammy, which would be okay if he didn't mention her mate. They are well known in the ultimate fighting community, and no one would go near her or her mate. But I have to admit they put on a good show for everyone. I didn't mean to yell at Uncle Keith, but I was trying to stay focused. I couldn't have any distractions, and his voice was getting through me. Once he left the changing room, I paced the room. I could hear Bex groan. Calm down, Lena, she said. You are going to wear the floor the way you are pacing. I stopped and sighed. I needed to keep my mind focused, but I could hear Alpha Gareth on the microphone telling everyone that the fights for the charity event would begin. I looked toward the TV in the room. I had never watched the matches before me, but I needed to keep my mind focused on something other than Tammy. I walked over, switched the TV on, and took a seat on the bench, where I placed all my gear. Alpha Gareth's face came on screen, and he smiled. "Welcome to this year's family charity event for the children," he shouted. "We have some amazing fights for you all this evening, let the first match begin." I watched as the curtains opened and the first competitor came out. It was Leon. He was one of the best-known ultimate fighters on the scene, and he was brutal as they came and would make his opponents tremble in fear. I wondered who Alpha Gareth had him fight against. I wasn't too long waiting as the curtain rolled back to reveal Carter. I was shocked, another fighter on the ultimate fight scene. I wonder how Alpha Gareth got both of the best fighters to participate in this. Both fighters are shifters, Leon is a werewolf, and Carter is a werbear. This was going to be interesting. As soon as the bell rang, both men circled each other and started their fight. I was in a trance as I watched. Sometimes it's good to watch fights, you may be able to pick up a few things along the way, as this is what I realized right now. Bex watched on through my eyes and even mentioned some moves we should try against Tammy, and I nodded, not really saying anything as I carried on watching the fight. The fight continued, but with one precise knockout kick by Leon to Carter's head, the match was over within seconds. There was a 15-minute pause between this fight and the next, as I heard someone knock on my door telling me to prepare as I was on after the next fight. I started to pull out everything I needed from my bag and got dressed in my Ultimate Fighter gear, shorts and a sports bra. I placed the tape next and thought I might as well tape my hands up. I placed the tape around my hand as the announcer mentioned the second fight was about to begin. I kept my eyes trained on my tape when the first person came out. People were cheering, making me look up and see Brock climb into the ring. I couldn't help the smirk on my face. I was starting to feel sorry for whoever was going against him in the ring until the curtain pulled back, and the person standing there made my face drop and hardened. There, walking hand in hand was Tammy with her mate, Demon. He was a big huge guy, but they were known for their cheating ways. Demon and Tammy liked to use their wolves. We can't use them in the ring, not in this type of fighting. But if you wanted to do an ultimate one where the shifter counterparts could get involved, they could. They would not place us in a ring, as many shifters tore up the ring after the first fight. So they used rope and mud for the ring, where everyone could stand around in the stands. I noticed the referee walking up to Demon in the ring and telling him a clean fight, but you could tell by Demon that he wasn't listening and shoved the referee out of the way. Tammy was standing at the side, and her eyes were fixed on her mate. Bex growled. "I'm going to kick that smug look from her face," she said. I ignored her. I couldn't help but look away from the screen and carry on putting tape on my hands. Demon and Brock started the match, and you could already see Demon being cagey. Demon was a rogue wolf and used his influence around some of the packs to get what he wanted. He is known for his brutal ways, and what he wants, he would get by force. I never saw it happen, but many rumors have floated around this pack over the last 6 years about him, especially in training. I taped up my hands, ready for the fight, but I couldn't help but glance at the screen. Demon was holding Brock in a headlock, but I moved closer to look. I noticed his eyes change slightly. Bex growled in my head. "His wolf," she roared. I could feel anger fill my veins as I carried on watching. The referee never saw what Demon was doing. His wolf was present but was not too close to the surface. Tammy was shouting, telling Demon what to do. I shot up and stared. I watched Brock kick Demon, but his wolf took over and flipped him over, so he was on his back. Demon's wolf went back as he straddled Brock and started punching him in the face repeatedly. Brock's face was covered in blood. He tried to protect himself from the punches, but nothing seemed to work. The referee never saw anything Demon did, or he completely ignored what he did. He did look frightened of him when he shoved him away. After a few seconds, the referee called the fight, and Demon won after Brock tapped out. A loud knocking came from outside my changing room. "Lena," shouted a woman's voice. "You need to be by the curtain in 5 minutes." I closed my eyes and sighed. I was ready and willing to kick some ass. I opened my eyes and walked over. I was already in my gear and ready for action. "We got this," said Bex. I could feel her strength running through me. I knew I could do this. I opened the door and walked out. I walked past a few people who nodded to me. I kept my head down and headed to the curtain. I could hear Alpha Gareth. He had called Tammy to the ring. There were a lot of chants and booing. There were mixed reactions to her. I closed my eyes, and I heard Alpha Gareth call my name. "You ready?" I asked Bex. I looked back at her, and she nodded. "I got your back," she said. "Let's do this, whatever happens, we did our best, win or lose." I opened my eyes and sighed. I took a step closer to the curtain to pull it back. Here goes nothing, I thought. Chapter 38. Lena. After taking a few moments, I walked through the curtain. Chance greeted me. I kept my eyes straight ahead, but I could feel eyes on me. I knew the crowd was there, but those eyes were on me. I climbed into the ring, and she spotted my dad with Logan and another guy, but there was no sign of Uncle Keith. Where is he? I wondered. Uncle Keith would usually be standing by the ring or on the sidelines. I stood up and looked around. Tammy was glaring at me, but I could see Demon behind her holding her waist, whispering in her ear. I couldn't hear what they were saying as the crowd was too loud. The referee lifted his hand and motioned for the announcer to ring the bell. I moved around, but my eyes scanned the crowd, and there was still no sign of Uncle Keith. Where was he? Surely my outburst earlier didn't make him mad. He knew how I like to stay focused before a fight, and he was talking way too much for me to handle. The bell rang out, and I stepped closer into the ring. Tammy and I circled each other. Tammy's gaze was on me. "You can't beat me," she shouted. "I will tear you apart." Bex was up on all fours and growling. "I can feel her, wolf. She is on the surface but not close enough for people to notice," she snarled. I stared at her. Tammy's eyes flickered to her wolf's and hers. I knew they were planning something, but what? I circled her, but I caught the referee grabbing hold of Tammy and growled. "Enough," he roared. "No wolf present, only humans." He warned her, but Tammy huffed and shrugged him off. I took that as my opportunity and ran toward her and started to punch her. I swung my arms everywhere, but mainly aiming for the sides. I turn my fists onto her sides as she tries to block, but I catch her in the ribs a few times. She roared. The crowds were cheering, but my head was on Tammy. Suddenly, I noticed something, but it was too late. Someone grabbed my leg and pulled me, making me lose my balance and fall. Boos erupted around the hall as I landed with a thud. Tammy took the opportunity to move quickly and straddle me. She was doing the same thing I was doing to her, but she had me pinned to the ground. I held my arms up and blocked every punch she gave me, but I missed a few. I couldn't help but grunt out with every contact with my arms and some to the shoulder. She was hitting me everywhere she could get to, that was skin. Demon shouts were being heard around the hall. "You got her, babe," he roared. Keep it up. Bex growled in my head. Lena, we need to get out of this, she hissed. I know, I grunted out through clenched teeth. I was trying to think of something, but an idea came to mind. Tammy was straddled just above my hips. I knew what to do, and I couldn't help but smirk. I used my legs to lift. I kept doing it till my legs touched and kicked her head. I could hear a roar. Tammy got off me with her hand straight to the back of her head. But that doesn't stop Tammy, she turns around and kicks me in the ribs. I groaned out. Tammy staggers over to the side as I turn onto my side. I try to breathe and look to see where she left. She was being hovered over by Demon, that wasn't a good sign. I quickly got up and stared at Tammy, whose back was still to me. Slowly, Tammy moved, and as she moved, I turned on my foot and unleashed a high kick, catching Tammy in the head again. Tammy is knocked out and lands with a thud on the mat. I stepped back as the referee hovered over Tammy, shot back up, and called it. I won the fight. But before I can celebrate, Demon charges into the ring, and his wolf has taken control. I can't help but feel slightly scared. Bex spots it and takes over my form by pushing me back slightly and jumping out of the way. Bex circles Demon, but he can't keep up as we move faster around him. Watch this, said Bex as a smirk appeared on the corner of her mouth. I look through my eyes as Demon has his back to us. Bex stops and uses her left leg to stand. She swings her right leg around and connects with Demon's head. Demon stumbles and lands on his knees. Bex smirks and does the same thing again as she moves fast, pushing me closer with her. We stand in front and lift our leg out quickly. My leg connects with Demon's face, which knocks him clean out, and he lands with a loud thud next to a disoriented Tammy, whose eyes grew wide as her mate landed right by her feet. Bex goes back as I come forward, and the crowd erupts into cheers. I looked at the referee, who nodded and smiled. He mouths, "Thank you," to me. He would have had to deal with him, and it wouldn't be too pretty. I moved, but I could feel my R*P throb. I groaned. Tammy must have caught me with her foot when she kicked me earlier, or it could be her weight when she sat on me. I moved toward the ring entrance and climbed out. I moved quickly and tried to get to the back entrance to get out of the way. I knew the next fight was about to happen, but I mainly wanted to get back to my room to see the damage to my rib. I was about to walk away when a hand grabbed my arm. I could feel a cold shiver run through me as I turned slowly to look who it was, but I had an idea who it was, as it reminded me of someone earlier today. Alpha Trevor. "Mate," he shouted smugly as I stared back at him. The whole hall went quiet, and every eye that was on us. I growled. Bex was up on all fours and snarling as we stared back at him. "Well," he said to me. Alpha Trevor had a firm grip on my arm and was smiling. I could see Alpha Gareth looking at me with a smile. I stared at him and growled. I was about to open my mouth and say something, but a roar rippled through the hall, "Mine!" My eyes widen as his scent hits me like a ton of bricks, twisting my emotions into turmoil. Bex purrs loudly in my head and whispers, "Mate." My mouth went dry as our eyes connected, and my stomach flopped. His eyes stayed on me for a brief moment, but he turned to look at Alpha Trevor, who still had his hand on my arm. My mind was going 100 miles an hour. Eli. How was he here? When did he come? But I was pulled from my thoughts. "Get away from my mate," roared Eli, his eyes full of anger. He was one pissed off alpha. Chapter 39. Eli. I couldn't control Blaze. He wanted to RP Alpha Trevor a new AE if he didn't move his arm from Lena's. I watched all the fights, and when Alpha Gareth called out Lena's name, my heart leaped out of my chest. When I watched her, her eyes were focused on what was happening around her, but you could tell she was in the zone. Keith mentioned that she might be looking for him as he was at her other fights, which showed. She looked toward Tim and Logan, but when she noticed that he wasn't around, she scanned around, trying to locate him. Once she started fighting, Keith ran commentary for all the fights but was more focused on Lena's and even mentioned what he thought she would do or not. When she knocked her opponent out cold, no one suspected the giant man on the side would enter the ring. Well, I had suspicions and wasn't surprised, saying that neither did Keith. I watched in amazement when Lena knocked him out with 2 kicks. Blaze told me that Bex took over as his wolf wasn't happy with Lena's actions towards his mate. I was over the moon, but I knew I had to wait till the coast was clear. But judging from Lena's face, she wanted to get out of the hall. Keith told me to come to the house later, and they would try to help me talk to her. I was reluctant about doing it that way, which annoyed Blaze, but we knew we had to do it Keith's way. I was about to leave when I saw Alpha Trevor move out of his seat and walk over to Lena. He pushed a few people out of the way to get to her. Alpha Gareth was following him. Alpha Trevor shouted something, but since I was behind a glass-windowed room, which muffled what he said. The hall went quiet, but I knew what was said. It doesn't take a genius to know what was said, as whenever someone mentions mate, everyone wants to witness the event happen. Blaze was up on all paws and started to growl. I had enough and stormed out of the room. Keith called me to get back, but I couldn't. I needed to announce that Lena's mate, not Alpha Trevor. I ignored Keith, barged through the door, and let out the loudest roar. "Mine!" I yelled. Everyone turned and stared at me, wide-eyed. I stared out, but my eyes landed on Lena, who looked more shocked to see me. Her face was blank. "Get away from mate," I yelled. I was pissed off as my eyes went to where Alpha Trevor's hand was. Blaze lets out a roar in my head, telling me to go to mate. I walked over and stared at everyone. Most people moved out of my way as soon as they saw me. I guess having 2 alphas announce that they have the same mate was unheard of, but I knew one was lying. I stepped closer, and Lena's scent hits me hard, and my heart beats faster in my chest. Blaze purrs in my head as he looks through my eyes. Even though it had only been a few days without seeing her, Lena was gorgeous, even in a sweaty mess. My eyes stared right at her, and her eyes never left mine. I could tell a few questions were running through her head, but that would have to wait. I didn't want to take my eyes off her. I was a few steps away from her. But I knew I had to, and I turned my attention to Alpha Trevor, who was glaring at me. I kept my mind blank. "Get off her," I said through clenched teeth. "She's not yours." Alpha Trevor stared at me but never moved his hand from Lena. "Alpha Eli," said Alpha Gareth. "I think you are," he started to say, but I let out a growl. "I'm Lena's mate, I have known for 6 years, I said as I focused on Alpha Trevor, who was now supporting a hard line. Gasps could be heard around the hall. Lena and I had some issues when we found out and needed space to work out what to do next. I turned to look at Alpha Gareth, who was staring back at me, confused. "Keith will explain," I said, and turned around. My eyes were back on Alpha Trevor. "I'm not telling you again," I snarled. "Get off her." Alpha Trevor didn't move, but before I could say or do anything, "Get off me," growled Lena, which made me look at her. Lena was annoyed, but I couldn't tell who with more. Alpha Trevor went to open his mouth, but Lena growled again. "Get off me now," she said and placed her hand on his. I could feel anger building up. Lena's eyes turned blue, and a loud growl escaped her lips. "Listen here, Alpha," said Bex. "You're not our mate, and my human told you nicely to get off us. I won't be nice." With that, Bex's claws come out and go through Alpha Trevor's hand. She pulls it up, and Alpha Trevor roars out in pain. Bex brings him closer to her and snarls, "Don't ever come near us again, or we will kill you." I could feel Lena with Bex, they were both centered and together. Bex pushes Alpha Trevor back, but not before she crushes his injured hand with her hand. There was a loud crack echoing around the room as she let go. Alpha Trevor moved his hand to his chest and growled. "You won't get away with that," he gritted and turned on his heel. I watched as Alpha Trevor barged past onlookers. Alpha Dean and Logan stood with widened eyes, but pride was riddling through them. I turned to face my mate, who was glaring back at me. "Get away from me," she yelled at me. "I don't want to see you." She turned on her heel and headed through the back entrance before I could say anything. That's not happening, I thought. I followed her, but I could hear Alpha Gareth call me. Keith called him. "Alpha Gareth, let me explain, they need to talk," he said. I was thankful to Keith. I walked through the curtain and looked around, but her scent hit me. I followed her scent and headed in that direction. It was more potent near the door to my side after only taking a few steps inside, and I could hear muttering in the room, and the door was ajar. "Why?" she muttered. I looked inside, and she had her back to me. I stepped in and walked up behind her. I placed my hand on her waist and spun her around to face me. Her eyes went wide as I pushed her toward the wall and held her in place with my body. I needed to do this, and I needed her to know. I leaned into her neck and said, "I don't accept your rejection." As soon as I said it, the mate bond ignited between us. My hands on her hips were like a fire flaming around us. I closed my eyes, trying to control myself, but I was met with Blaze. He frowned at me. "You are not talking to her first," he said, taking complete control over me. I was pushed back, but not too far. Blaze looked at me and sighed. "I'm talking to mate," he said. "I want to tell her everything. You will FK up." I stared at him, but I knew he was right. Everything I had done to her was all my doing. We all have pasts, Lena might have got one too. But I should have known better. I found out she was my mate, and I should have been faithful to her. I sighed. "You're right," I said. Blaze nodded and took complete control of my body. I needed him to get through to Lena. I just hoped she would listen to him. Chapter 40. Blaze. I opened my eyes and stared back into the most amazing sight. My mate was staring back, but her eyes widened as soon as she saw me. "Hello, little mate," I said, leaning into her neck and inhaling her scent. "Finally, I get to see you." I pulled back and stared back at her. She gaped at me as she stared, but the realization came, and a slow smile slid across her face. "Blaze," she said softly. "It's nice to meet you." I smiled. I love hearing her say my name. I could feel Bex. She wanted to come through to talk to me. I wanted to talk and see her too, but it wasn't her I had to convince her to accept us. My human is a dumbass, and he should have never been with all those women, especially after we found our mate. I had an inkling that she might be our mate when we were young pups. I never questioned the moon goddess about why she picked us to be together, but it never bothered me. It didn't bother Eli. He had a stupid crush on her before he knew she was our mate but never acted on it because our mate was his best friend's sister and due to her age. I shook my head to get back to her, and I needed to tell her everything. "Blaze," she said before I could even start talking. Why are you forward? Where's Eli? Well, I thought, at least she was not calling him Elias anymore. I could feel Eli's smug grin plastered on his face. I grunted but looked at her. I wanted to talk to my mate, I said. I want to talk about my dumbass human. I heard a groan in my head, and I couldn't help but smirk. Right, jackass. Lena smirked. At least I'm not the only one who thinks that then, she said. I chuckled. No, you are not, I said. Hey, shouted Eli. I can hear and see everything. I ignored him. I stared at Lena. I didn't want her to move away from me. I knew Eli's hands were on her waist and kept them there. She calmed every inch of my soul, especially after that stupid alpha had his hand on her. Well, talk, she said with a smile. I cleared my throat. I don't know where to begin, I said. I thought for a moment but sighed. Stupid human shouldn't have been with all those smelly women, they made me sick, I said. I couldn't help the shiver that ran through me. Every woman he had sex with, I had to feel it all. Toward the end, he was constantly thinking about Lena. Human thought being with them would help him deal with my horniness, but it never did. I looked at her as she bit her bottom lip. I had to gulp as I would love to taste her lips right now, but it wasn't the place or the time. I didn't make it easy for my human, though, I said. When we discovered that you were our mate, I wanted to spend every waking day with you. I wanted to be with you, and so did human. But we knew you were too young to know about us. Papa told us we needed to send you away as we would be sent to jail, especially when I was ready to pounce on you every day. Lena kept her face neutral. Bex was close by, but not close enough for me to see her. I wanted to talk to Bex, but I knew I had to win over her human first. She was the one who was hurt the most. I stared at her for a moment. But Lena sighed. I can understand all that, she said. I mean, I was young. I could feel Eli move to the front, but not enough for Lena to notice him. Tell her about the spare room, he muttered, shame sweeping in. I smirked and looked back at him. I wanted to tell her this when she was okay with us or when we were having a laugh one night. You sure? I asked. Stop smirking, he muttered. Tell her. I looked back at her. Lena's eyes searched mine. What did he say? I smirked. Human wanted me to tell you what really happened in that room in your house, I said. Lena furrowed her eyebrows at me. What do you mean by that? I know what he did, I heard him, she said. I could feel the anger sweeping in through her. I drew circles on her waist to calm her down, which helped a little. The mate bond was affecting me, but also Lena too. I cleared my throat. Not what you think, I said, and leaned closer to her neck. Her scent engulfed me, but it settled me for a while. I felt like I was a part of her or something. I licked my lips, but I knew I needed to carry on talking to her. Human never had women with him in that room, he never wanted you to hear him with us, not even when you were younger, I said. That's a lie, she said. I heard him, them even. I smirked. Oh, you heard something, I said as I inhaled her scent again but moved closer to her neck. I was mere inches from placing my human's mouth on her neck. I could feel Eli. Stop playing games, he said. Tell her. And I will be kissing her, not you, with my mouth. You can wait till you are in your true form to kiss her. I couldn't help but grunt. Touchy, I thought. I sighed and moved slightly to look at my mate, but she had a confused face. Human never had women in that room, I said. It seems there were some videos someone in your family liked to watch and never wanted to get rid of. Her eyes stayed on me, but a few moments later, her eyes widened as if realizing what I was insinuating. You mean to tell me that Eli watched porn in that room, she muttered. I nodded. Yeah, little one, he did, I said. Her eyes never left me, but she looked even more confused. Most women would mention that they were with Eli, she said. I frowned. Did they mention him by name? I asked. She looked blank for a few moments but looked back at me. I heard a few moans, she said. People moaning his name. I shook my head. I know when that stupid she-wolf was with him and would take advantage of him when he was low and wanted you, but he never would take her to that room, not when you were there, I said and swept my anger toward Eli, who knew I was pissed at him for what he was like with her. I knew his true feelings for Lena, but he never once loved that other she-wolf. But most of the time, your brother would have them in his room when the other women were there. He was the one who was with them. Human was on his own, with his hand. Little mate stared at me. I don't know whether to believe you, she said. Seems like you would say anything to me to get me to be your mate. I frowned. You're one stubborn human, I said, and little mate's mouth dropped open, but before she could say anything, I carried on. I don't mean to be harsh, but you are. I am trying to tell you everything and it's the truth. Lena's eyes widened, but I carried on. I never wanted any of those women, and never did Eli, I said. When we turned a certain age, I was horny all the time when it came to your scent, I was ready to mark you. When Eli sent you away, I was angry with him. But over time, I knew it was the right thing to do. I was making it hard for him too. I sighed. After you left, Eli never went near another woman, I said. Lena watched me, but I stared into her eyes. I was willing for Bex to listen to me and hear me tell her the truth. Eli told that she-wolf that you were his mate, and she accepted it. I thought she was over him, but it surprised Eli and me that she was acting like this, as she never bothered us when she found her mate. I don't know what changed, but whatever it is, we will work it out together. I could feel Eli move closer to the front, watching through his own eyes as our mate's face changed slightly, but I could tell she was talking to Bex. I couldn't wait to see Bex, but I needed to deal with the little one first. Lena looked back at me. I think we can work things out, but we need to take it slowly, she said. I couldn't help the beaming smile that appeared on my face. Don't rush me, she said with a small smile. She looked like she was about to laugh. I nodded. I looked back at Eli, who was smiling. I sighed and looked back at little mate. I let human come forward now, I said. He listened to everything I had to say to you and even asked me to tell you about the videos in that room. Lena nodded but smirked. I leaned into her slightly, hovered over her lips, and placed a kiss on her cheek. The tingles rippled through us like electricity. It took all my doing not to ravish her in one. I pulled back and closed my eyes. I pushed Eli to the front as I went back into his head. I had to kiss my mate, it may be the only time I can till she believes us. My heart ached at the thought, but I didn't know if she believed us. I guess it was up to my human now to tell her and prove that we wanted her for our mate and Luna. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.